Something I often wonder about is the origins of traditional folktales. Where do they come from? Is there an element of reality to them? Or are they just ways for us to manifest our worst fears in something tangible yet fantastical? As is the case in tonight's story, is this real or is it fantasy? What are these people about to encounter on their trip to the colds of Russian Siberia? Well, my dear friends, another week is upon us, and it's time once again for you to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. The darkness of the night surrounded everything. The wind howled and blew snow through the giant coniferous trees, but not enough to remove the snow caked onto the branches. I remember thinking that this night is so beautiful. If only I had the time to stop and enjoy it. But the thought passed. I could not have forgotten the reason I was there. The reason I was deployed to what most would consider an inhospitable region of the Siberian tundra. The Russians had been encountering an entity out there. We'd seen what it could do in the village earlier, and God, it was terrifying. I couldn't believe what I was doing. My heavy winter boots crunched alone in the forest, barely audible in the wind. As I trudged on, I began to see a small, flickering light in the distance. It turned into two, and as I got closer, through the hellish snowstorm we'd been fighting the whole way, I saw the lights morph into the square glass panes of windows on a log cabin. This was it. Sorry to pull a cliché, but there is a lot to explain before I can tell you about that. Now brace yourself, because this is going to be a long one, boys and girls, and all others. Don't judge. My organization is like a real-life counterpart of the SCP Foundation. In fact, we think that the whole SCP thing was started by a former or current employee looking to make a quick buck off the idea, but it got too popular too fast, and he had to recuse himself. Unfortunately, the fictional SCP Foundation has a lot more funding than we do, and has the actual support of governments all over the world. The only thing that we have is a modest spy network that lets us know any time fishy stuff is going on. We also have some pretty good AI crawling the internet, salvaged from a crashed alien ship, which, I might add, I retrieved. But that's a story for another time. Also, unlike the SCP Foundation, our job is not to contain, but to neutralize. Guess you could call us the SNP Foundation. Anyways, back to the forest. There's a Russian legend, or really more of a folktale, called Baba Yaga. I could go on for days explaining the history and etymology of the folktale, but it boils down to an ambiguously good or evil old lady who flies around in a mortar, wields a pestle, and lives in a house that stands on chicken legs. Local reports from military units stationed nearby reported seeing this exact thing, causing mass casualties in local villages. So the Russians sent their version of us to check it out. They never came back. Although world governments hate us for our far-reaching paranormal authority, and always try to hinder us by denying passports and the like, they always call us up whenever something isn't going as planned. We have a few lines of communication open with government officials in the field, and a single green phone that rings whenever a non-emergency call comes in from one of them. I was sitting in my boss's office when the call came in. My boss is a pretty large guy, although over the phone, his voice sounds intimidating as hell. The phone rang, and he picked it up after releasing a long, bored sigh. He answered it with, "This is Bob from Desert Dry Cleaning Services. How may I help you?" The person on the other side talked frantically for a moment, before my boss interrupted them, saying, "So, basically you have an emergency, and you need our help again." You just called us last month. I think we're going to have to pass." As he said this last part, he winked at me. The guy on the line started yelling, practically screaming, as he said he would give us anything we wanted as long as we got here in the next 24 hours. My boss picked up a notepad on his desk, holding the phone away from his face as he whispered to me, "Hey, anything you need?" I responded gleefully, and upon a moment of reflection, knowing I would be going to Russia very soon, answered, "The newest model SVD with 100 rounds and a couple of RPG-18s. He listed off the items on his acquisition list, including an older model T-72, and once he reached the end, told him, "Upon arrival of our team, they are to be armed with 2 AN-94s, an SVD-14, 4 RPG-18 disposable rocket launchers, and enough ammo to sustain a small army." The rep was not too happy about this, but agreed after the boss threatened to send the team to a made-up priority mission in the African bush instead. So, after a flurry of meetups and the hiring of an on-demand contract pilot from our base in Kandahar, as well as Dimi, we landed in Russia, funnily enough in a Russian-made Antonov AN-70 cargo plane with several tons of goods. As everything was offloaded, and our payment loaded on, except for the tank, which was being shipped by rail to our main base, we disembarked into a light snowstorm, with even more snow on the horizon. The wind was also picking up, which made our landing a bit rougher than expected. The military airbase was in a flurry of activity, unmanned drones being launched in a circular pattern from the corner farthest from us, as well as tankers and fighter bombers taking off on the second runway. A small contingent of about 5 armed guards came to meet us. Although my Russian was a bit rusty, I had refreshed my memory by speaking with Dimi a bit on the way over, mostly about what we thought was out there. The lead man introduced himself as Lieutenant Petrenko of the MCHS, Ministry of Emergency Situations, Spetsnaz, or the Russian Special Forces Division. He pointed toward the area, launching the drones as he yelled in Russian over the increasing winds. "The weapons you wanted are over there, and so is the command post. The MCHS brass will brief you over there. Here comes our truck." His last remark referred to an old Soviet-era Euro 6-wheel truck approaching down the side of the runway. Gabe merely grunted in acknowledgement, as he could understand little Russian. In all truth, he was far from the ideal man for the mission, but he'd been picked because of the fact that all our other competent operators were off taking care of some idiot guy who tried to replicate the Russian sleep experiment again. Anyways, we got into the truck for the short ride around the perimeter. And through the canvas-covered back, I could see an unusual amount of perimeter security, even for the Russians. More Soviet vintage BMPs, armed with 30mm autocannons and ATGM launchers. I even saw some new Russian Federation vehicles, some I'd heard of and some not. Part of the waiver they signed when they hired us explained that we were not responsible for what we saw on or were told of as a result of our trip, which is the reason several high-security military and paranormal areas have been exposed in the past few years, albeit in the form of creepypastas. Well, our truck reached the command area, and we disembarked onto the ground, which even more snow was piling up on. Heading into the large tent that qualified as a command post, the short, old and stout MCHS general was standing on a chair, screaming at his troops in Russian, something along the lines of, "Find it, or I'll have you sent to a penal colony." I walked up to him and said in English, "All right, buddy, the cavalry's here." As soon as he saw me, his eyes still in a rage, dressed in a light grey combat uniform, 6 foot tall, holding a ruck full of special equipment, he deflated immediately. He nearly jumped off the chair and grabbed my hand, shaking it vigorously while looking me in the eyes. They revealed his true emotions at that moment. Even if he did not look with those eyes to his men, what I saw within them was true fear. This was rare for a man like him, as the MCHS were the Russians' go-to paranormal guys normally, but this was much greater than they could handle. I shook his hand firmly and asked, in Russian, as I looked down at his uniform, "Greetings, General Smirnov. Please describe to us the nature of the threat and all the intelligence you have on it." He then asked me, voice full of fear, "Do you know the legend of Baba Yaga?" "Da," I responded. He said back to me, as he gestured to a soldier manning a projector, "It is here, but much worse." The soldier put on a grainy, zoomed-in picture of what appeared to be a house, which upon closer inspection was, in fact, a house on chicken legs. The timestamp and telemetry information in the corner showed this had been taken hours ago by a drone. The general then said to me, in a hushed English voice, "This photograph was taken right before the drone was shot down. We don't know by what, but as it touched down, we could hear the sound of an old woman cackling. It was horrifying, Comrade Vanya. We have tried airstriking it, tried hitting it with everything short of a nuclear weapon, and the higher-ups are talking about using tactical nuclear weapons to obliterate the whole province if we can't contain it. I don't need to show you any evidence, but this monster has already massacred several villages worth of people, and will continue to do so unless we stop it. I don't want another Chernobyl or Kishtim on our hands. Please, comrade, you are the last line we have." His speech was lost on me, however. He had no idea what he was dealing with, and it was evident. Gabe had been watching from behind me, with Jimmy at his side. He spoke up for me, saying something we could agree on. "I don't think you know exactly what you're dealing with, sir. I don't think anyone does. All due respect, but we may not be able to stop it. And at that point, your best option may be to nuke the bastard." General Smirnov looked at Gabe, then back at me. I nodded in agreement. Whatever the case, we need to get moving. If we don't leave soon, we'll be totally snowed in. Smirnov, looking down on his luck, said, "Very well. I have ordered Lieutenant Petrenko to assist you with whatever you need. He will show you your weapons and vehicles." At the last word, I perked up. "Vehicles?" I said curiously. "Da. You can choose whatever you think you'll need from the motor pool. I don't think Mr. Putin will be angry at me as long as what you do with them will help us." "Thank you, General," I said, going to shake his hand, but he had already spun on his heel, heading outside while pulling out a cigarette. Dimi spoke for the first time since arriving on base, warning, "Gentlemen, I don't mean to upset you, but this weather is only going to get worse, so I don't think vehicles bigger than a snowmobile would be much help while we're on the hunt." I said to him, "Couldn't agree more, but we still have to be able to get somewhere quick." As we walked out of the tent, we tried to figure out what it would be. We'd seen plenty of supernatural stuff. It's our job, after all. But nothing as physical as this. That was all hours ago. When we got our weapons sorted, and were headed to the motor pool to pick out our vehicle, a Gaz Tiger, a 4x4 APC similar in function to the American Humvee, screamed to a stop behind us. Lieutenant Petrenko in the front seat yelling at us to "Get in! We found it!" Behind him, an armored column was forming up, consisting of several tanks and a few infantry carriers. He said as our team loaded up, me in the front, Gabe and Demi in the back. "Look, we will get you there, but after that, you are on your own. Sorry, comrade, but my wife and children need me alive." After pausing for a moment, as he pulled into the column behind the tank, I said quietly, "Hey, ours too." With this, I could feel Gabe glaring at me from behind. He never mentioned his family to me, but I knew well enough. He never liked being reminded about them on missions. He said it distracted him, but after that statement, a blanket of silence fell over the truck. Soon the column started moving, fast too. Even the tanks were sort of sliding around corners on the slushy roads, and as we neared our destination, a slight bit of nausea and nervousness began to hit me. We still had no idea what we were going up against. Well, we had some idea, but we had no idea what to do to stop it. It would all depend on what happened next. If the legends were true, and thus far they had been, this could be the result of anything, and it would be unlikely that what we were going to do would stop her. As the convoy pulled into visual range of the town, the tanks fanned out and formed an arc in front of the convoy, bringing it to a stop. There were already some fires rising from it, and this apparently was close enough for the lead guys, because someone came over the radio, saying something in Russian akin to, "No goddamn way." As our truck pulled to a stop just behind the tanks, Lieutenant Petrenko said to me, "We will pull back to a safe distance. If you need a quick extraction, though, you may have to wait a while. Conditions are worsening, and it doesn't look like it'll let up for another 2 days." Gabe and Demi hopped out at the back doors, rucks full of ammo and rations. As I disembarked, one foot on the truck's floor and one on the deep snow on the ground, Petrenko said to me, "Comrade, I can't say anything about your sanity, but you are very brave. Let's have a drink when you get back, on me." I pulled my other foot out the truck, hand on the door, and said, playfully, "Only if you can outdrink me." Petrenko responded with a hearty Russian laugh, saying, "It's on, Amerikansky. Good luck out there." I nodded in thanks as I shut the door, and turned towards the back just in time for Gabe to throw me my heavy pack. The expression on his face was irritated, perhaps at the fact that I'd gotten so friendly with Petrenko. Either way, we were headed out. Before we started to move the truck away, Petrenko honked at us and pointed toward the front of the road, where a lone-tracked APC was parked, engine running, intended for us. In my ruck, I had several different types of equipment. One was a specialty radiometer that would detect radioisotopes associated with certain lab experiments in radioactive areas. Sometimes, on purpose or by accident, governments create things far worse than they intend to. So we've worked out that the least they can do is mark them so we'll know when it's man-made. Another is a multi-purpose sensor mounted onto the side of a helmet that measures many different things to determine when an entity is in the area. Temperature, magnetic and gravitational fluctuations, and light. And finally, the gem of the whole jewelry box is the Spectrum. No, it's not an acronym for anything. Spectrum goggles developed by one of our secret labs. They take all of the data from the sensors and put it into visible form in a heads-up display. This display acts like augmented reality in a number of ways, but it essentially highlights the paranormal activity depending on its severity and physical presence. It's really odd, in a way, because after you kill someone, you can watch their body begin to glow for a bit before fading away into nothingness. The lab techs say it's a programming glitch they're still trying to work out, but I like to think it's real. As we walked into the town, Gabe and I donned the goggles and handed a pair along with an extra helmet and sensor pod to Dimi. Although the boss didn't like the idea of trusting the expensive tech to a non-employee, we managed to coax him into giving it up for a mission, as long as Dimi signed a contract to return it under penalty of death. We hopped into the APC, apparently a winterized MT-LBV, with Gabe driving and Dimi manning the heavy machine gun turret. I sat in the commander's position. Dragunov out and loaded. The village was indeed on fire. In fact, every building in the village was burning. Not on fire, but burning. And they looked as if they'd been torched by a flamethrower. The smell coming from each was horrendous. It didn't take a genius to recognize that it was humans cooking in those buildings. The snow between houses was melting and mixing with the blood and ashes on the ground, causing a disgusting sort of black-red mud to cover the area. This was what the cleanup crews assigned to the other villages had been reporting as death ice. Once everything calmed down, the mixture would freeze again, making a sort of concrete-like substance impossible to remove by hand. The source was unidentifiable. With so much blood everywhere, the corpses were nowhere to be found. Either they'd been left in the houses or taken. With what the crews had found in the other villages, it appeared that only the adults were left in the houses, although they died long before the fire had been set. Children, or what was left of them, were nowhere to be found. It wasn't easy to identify the charred skeletons either. Each looked like a boulder had been dropped from a great height, crushing all of their bones and instantly destroying all internal organs. Oddly enough, the head was often left intact, except for the case of one human, left completely unidentifiable because of the way they were killed. Not a single thing remained of them, except for a pile of jelly and bone fragments splattered across a 50-meter squared area. A rifle was also found at the scene, with one round having been fired around the same time of the person's death. One thing that was not evident until we began to disembark was the tracks on the ground. The footprints left were nearly the size of our APC, with 3 distinct branches coming off a central point. They'd slammed into the asphalt roads and obliterated them, and if it wasn't for the constant snowfall, you might just think they were remote location potholes. Our goggles showed a tiny bit of residue left over in them, something that we could track. This being seen, we turned them off so as not to waste battery. Dimi was quick to suggest that we follow it, and seeing no other way, we did just that. But things began to go wrong when we realized we would have to pack all of this gear into the forest, as our tank was too large. We suddenly noticed that Gabe was mysteriously absent. I reached for my radio, as I heard the sound of engines on the other side of the village. I said, "Copperhead 2, you find anything?" The sound of a small engine came over the radio, even louder than in the air, with Gabe replying, "Copperhead Actual. Yeah. Got 2 small Vics that can take us into the forest, snowmobiles." Although we preferred to work personally when we could, in the field we used a randomly generated call sign for that mission. We didn't want any information about us being known by anyone, or anything, that could potentially use that against us. Dimi and I half-jogged over to the charred shed Gabe had kicked open, quite easily to reveal a pair of snowmobiles, one much larger than the other, and with a small trailer. Gabe looked at them and said, "Oh, even with the extra space on this one, we're going to have to leave some stuff behind." I volunteered a few of the rockets and some of the more stationary spectral analysis gear. We left it all in the vehicle we'd arrived on, something, at the time, I had no idea would save our lives later. Gabe and Dimi took the largest snowmobile with the trailer, and I took the smallest, hanging my gear on the sides. Dimi was driving, leading the way so we could track the beast. Not only were the tracks very prominent, even in the heavy snowfall, but the trees along its winding path through them were also damaged and sometimes completely knocked over. We were making excellent time, and at some points I thought I could even hear the heavy footsteps of the house in the distance. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before we had to stop and fill up the gas tanks of the snowmobiles, especially the larger one. We pulled up to a stop in a small clearing. Gabe and I filled up the vehicles while Dimmy walked off to, take a piss. Gabe and I both told him not to go too far, but he wasn't listening. It was as if someone or something had possessed him to go just a little too far. Suddenly, he yelled our names, and we could hear the fast crunch, crunch of footsteps in the snow coming towards us. Gabe and I had just finished emptying the jerry cans strapped to the sides of the snowmobile, so we threw them to the side and grabbed our rifles off of our backs, both sprinting towards Dimmy's frantic screams. And then we heard a furious, deep roar. I made the quick mental note that this, although terrifying, sounded quite natural, which would not be entirely incorrect. We came over a small hill in the snow moments later, just in time to hear Dimmy scream in pain. He tripped over a fallen tree and fallen hard, headlong into its branches on the ground. His head and face were bleeding, but the real threat emerged from the snowbank on the other side of the small valley, bursting through it like a train and roaring with the volume of one too. It was a bear, but absurdly, almost comically larger than a normal bear, with the head being disproportionately large to the body. Gabe and I looked at each other quickly. I motioned with my head towards Dimmy and yelled, "I'll cover you." Gabe lowered his rifle as I raised mine, giving it his all in a sprint towards Dimmy, while I fired into the bear. The reason I say fired into is because it looked like the bear didn't even notice. 9 out of the 10 box magazine of 7.62 by 54 I slung at the bear had about as much effect as slingshot pellets, even though they were obviously hitting and drawing blood. But the last round hit it directly in the face, and this gave it some pause. It roared even louder this time, while clawing at its left eye, but only for a moment. This was all that Gabe needed to scoop up Dimmy in a fireman's carry, sprinting as fast as he could with the weight of another person on his back, rifle on a sling in front of his chest. As soon as he passed me, the bear started moving again, faster than before, directly at me. Thinking quickly, I took off just to the right of Gabe, who was heading to the snowmobiles. I was quite literally running for my life, but this bear was fast. Having to think on my feet was my specialty, and, although my planning ability was not, it made me a very effective improviser. The creature was huge, and after a few moments of running and realizing there was no way I could escape it like this, I saw a very thick group of trees to the left. I could feel the beast gaining on me, the earth-shaking footsteps growing closer to my frantic running at every moment. I darted between the trees as I felt its breath on my back, and it crashed into them. Although it didn't stop, it was dazed and moving slowly. I took this opportunity to run towards the snowmobiles again, hoping Gabe will be ready to bug the hell out. Soon, the bear regained its composure, and although it wasn't running at the same speed as before, it was still faster than me. My legs were starting to feel heavy, even with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The snow was slowing me down, but through the trees I saw the path we'd taken, and beyond that, the clearing we'd parked in. Knowing I was close, I willed myself to go faster, thinking, nothing has killed me yet, and damn it, I wasn't going to die doing something as normal as fighting a bear. As I cleared the trees on the edge of the clearing, I noticed two things. 1, both of the snowmobiles were running. 2, Gabe was kneeling down next to the larger one, off to the side and slightly behind it, holding something above his shoulder. I ran towards my snowmobile, pushing with every last ounce of strength I had, until Gabe yelled at me. I didn't hear what he said the first time, but the second was very clear. He was screaming at me to hit the deck. Although we weren't friends, I trusted him as I did every other operator. So without thinking, I dove for the ground, shielding my face with my arms. As soon as my body touched the ground, I heard the sound of a rocket leaving its launch tube and accelerating for moments before slamming into something fleshy and exploding a millisecond later. However, the rocket's explosion was nothing compared to what happened to the bear. When I heard the impact, I pushed myself off the ground and took a few steps toward the mobiles, and looked back to see the bear, now with a massive chunk of flesh missing from its left side, starting to blow up like a balloon. The inflation spread from the head down, and when it reached the exploded part of his body, it made a popping sound, followed by the sound of gas escaping, then a small explosion as the expanding gas that leaked out of the wound lit off in a giant, brilliant blue-green flame, with the gases burning off for a few seconds afterwards. Once we realized the bear was quite dead, we turned off the vehicles and pulled Demi off of the second one. His ankle was still bent at a totally unnatural angle, which we had to fix. Although I did know how to perform most basic first aid, and I knew how to set a bone, Gabe knew much better. He instructed me to hold Demi down as he pulled out a medical kit from his bags. He yanked out several syringes of anesthetic and one large one of morphine. Demi looked a little spooked at the sight of the needles, but was still in and out of consciousness due to the pain the ankle was causing him. Gabe started with something to numb the leg and bone around the fracture, which he put in quite deep. I'd never asked him where he'd gotten his expertise, but I was fairly certain, due to his referring to the wounded as patients more than once in the field, that he was an EMT at one point, or at least something similar. As he was working on the leg, I looked over to the bear's mutilated corpse and noticed something odd was happening to it. It was, very slowly, disintegrating. By disintegrating, I don't mean falling apart. I mean dissolving into the air and just floating away. Demi started to move, and I turned towards him. With the pain disappearing, he seemed to be in a little more control over his consciousness, but only a little, due to the morphine. I looked at Gabe, who motioned to me, pointing at Demi, then with both of his fingers into his eyes, and then up into the sky, which I interpreted as keep him looking up. As Gabe worked, Demi started talking, speech slurred and barely intelligible. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was all in Russian, and there was a lot of swearing, and he mentioned the bear a lot. I just tapped him on the shoulder and kept his eyes up, telling him how he was going to be fine. Then, with no warning, I heard a crunch, and Demi winced in discomfort. I looked down at his ankle, seeing it had been reset into a normal position. By now, the swelling was getting bad. Gabe pulled out a compact, a rolled-up SAM splint. Hikers will know the kind I'm talking about. He wrapped it around his ankle and started putting on his boot. He left it unlaced so we could take it off later. The swelling was making it hard to put on, but if we'd left it off, he'd get frostbitten for sure. In his sedated state, both of us had to lift him onto the snowmobile, and he had to be practically tied down in order to keep him on. It was getting late in the day, but we still had a job to do, and I was still plenty jittery from the incident with the weird-ass bear. As I started to walk towards my snowbike, Gabe said, "I don't know what the hell that thing was, but it's pretty dead, and I don't think we'll find another one unless we're messing around in the bush like dumbass here," jabbing his thumb back at Demi. I just nodded and got on. I tried to use my radio to contact HQ and let them know about the situation, but I couldn't get a signal out. We set off from there, and everything was going okay until night fell. The storm was still raging, and the snow was really starting to pile up. We kept seeing strange lights through the heavy snow, but they seemed distant, almost like the lights of the cities you see at night, but they would come and go. We were still following the path of the thing. As in the forest, it was fairly evident where it had been. Right around the time night fell, and to be honest, there wasn't much of a difference, we ran out of fuel. We'd stopped several times to refuel, and we'd planned it to run out about the same time on both machines. Right before we pulled into a clearing, the motor started sputtering and finally gave out. However, we weren't expecting it to for another hour or so. Gabe's did too. I dismounted and checked the gas tank. There was still plenty left, but the engine just wouldn't start back up again, and neither would the other. Everyone, especially Dimi, was swearing left and right, but we couldn't do much about it. Obviously there was some kind of interference, because when Gabe pulled out his rifle, the electrical optic was non-functional. We decided we had to keep going, but not until after we'd eaten. Dimi was becoming lucid again, and as long as he could take a few pain meds every so often to keep his ankle tolerable, he was good enough to handle a gun. Gabe ripped the objects off of both of them and chucked them onto the ground next to the machines, while I pulled out the winter MREs the Russians had given us, or at least what we'd stripped them down to. Each came in a cardboard box, but you could significantly reduce the size by stripping them down to their components and packing them separately. The heaters worked on a chemical reaction. You pour water in, and out comes heat. I heated up everyone's food and brought it over as I was starting to eat some of my dry stuff. We all ate our food in silence, but not for any real reason. We just didn't have anything to talk about. We were a group of professionals, sent to do a job nobody else would or could do. To be honest, we aren't even that special, but everyone calls us the experts because we always manage to deal with the problem. After we'd finished eating, we started moving down the trail, carrying what we could. We had to leave a lot of extra ammo and another RPG behind because Dimi couldn't carry anything but what was on his vest. Gabe and Dimi both had about 5 magazines for their rifles, and I had 7 mags for my Dragunov, plus the 1 remaining RPG. Gabe took Dimi's rifle and strapped on a good-sized stick with some rope, turning it into a crutch. Although it could still fire, Gabe told Dimi to just cut off the stick if shit hit the fan. As soon as we had our gear in order, we began heading into the forest, wind still raging and snow still falling. The march was grueling, and as the sun got lower, the air only got colder. We had to put on everything we had to stay warm, and the helmets came off in favor of warm headgear. Scarves were wrapped, and by the time it was truly dark, we were wrapped up head to toe like the kid from A Christmas Story. 30 minutes in, we took a rest, drinking some water and checking on Dimi's ankle. The swelling was still bad. Too bad to take off the boot, or we might not get it back on. However, it had stopped growing, which was good. After a few moments of drinking water and snacking on a few miscellaneous items from the MREs, those of us that could changed our socks and moved on. Good thing we ate then, because 10 minutes down the trail, everyone lost their appetite. Although I'm sure someone must have noticed the fact there were no children among the dead from the attacks. Nobody had said anything to us. We had noticed, but until now, I'd held out hope they were still alive, or something. I was sorely mistaken. The pile was huge, a few meters high, probably the children of all the villages that were attacked so far. Although there were plenty of bodies, these were not mutilated like all of the others. They were simply lifeless, stone-cold dead, eyes closed. No signs of physical attack, or really anything to suggest what had killed them. We would have loved to have had our goggles working right about then, But without electricity, they were toast, and we'd left them at the machines to be recovered later. The sight of all those kids just hurt me. They had likely been killed while we were on the trail. But then, what if we had gotten there on time? What could we have done? Probably nothing. We would have likely ended up like all of the others, dead and desecrated in the middle of fuck knows where, Siberia. We did notice something interesting, though. All of the kids, as best we could tell, were between the ages of 10 and 16, essentially teenagers. So now we had some potentially useful information, and I was starting to form a theory, but I wasn't quite ready to share it with the other two yet. I needed more for this to really make sense, and they were probably thinking the same thing anyways. It looked to me like this Baba Yaga was looking for someone specific, a teenager. Why, I had no idea. Like I said, I needed more info. We were going down the trail for a ways after that, eager to get away from the corpses. They didn't smell because of the cold, but we didn't want to be near them regardless. At some point, an hour or so later, we decided to bivouac for a few hours. We hadn't slept too well on the way over, and with the way this day had gone, it was starting to get to us, especially Dimi. We were also running out of pain meds for him, and had at most a few hours left of trail walking. We set up a few small shelters, and made sure everything was waterproofed. I was first on the guard rotation. Gabe and Dimmy set off to sleep, and I was alone for a good 10 minutes before things started getting, well, odd, to say the least. I was tired. Gabe was supposed to relieve me in another hour, but that seemed so far away. My eyes lazily drifted around, watching the trees with the sway of the wind, constantly blowing in one direction. The snowfall had lightened a bit, just enough for visibility to be passable again. As my head turned towards my front again, they moved past something glinting between the trees in front of me. I snapped back to get it, becoming much more alert. I stared at it for a few seconds, before raising my rifle to use my scope. Although none of our electronics were working, you can't beat a good old-fashioned glass optic. I pulled it up to my shoulder quickly, and saw through the scope something really freaking weird. An old lady, kind of zombie-like, was just standing there. I could feel her looking right at me through the scope. My eyes widened, my grip tightened, and my index finger moved down towards the trigger. But then, it got even weirder. She spoke. When I say that, I don't mean she said something, and I saw it through the scope. I mean, her voice came straight out of her mouth and into my head. What she said was simple, but still completely disturbing. Still staring at me, her lips moved, as she slowly, with her raspy voice, like two bricks scraping together, said, "You and your friends smell different. You do not carry the Russian smell, although I think one of you once did. You, however, do not. You never did. Perhaps you can help me find my little Raybonot, my child. He was taken one day. Living amongst the human folk was bad for him, I told him. His babushka, his grandmother told him. He was taken by big men from the Kremlin. I've been looking for him for a month, but I could not find him inside my dominion." I started to open my mouth to say something, but she raised her voice violently and screamed into my head as her face contorted into a terrible, rage-filled sneer. "Silence! I know what you are thinking, little man from the desert." She returned to her normal voice, and her face relaxed a bit, but not entirely. "I know who you are. You were sent here to destroy me in my beloved home. Many have tried, just like you. You will not succeed. With this, the images of missiles being swatted out of the sky by her mere thoughts, and people being crushed by a massive flying pestle filled my head. The last thing she showed me were the completely obliterated bodies of the Russian MCHS team sent in to investigate. She conceitedly noted, "I can be killed, but not by the likes of you. Your little band of assassins does much, but mere men cannot kill me. You would have to unleash your vaults to do anything to me." At this, I was dumbfounded. How could she even know about those? I can't even say what they are, but for her to know, and for her to know what was in them, either way, I understood we could not win. She left me one final statement before disappearing into the snow once again. "Come down the path. There you will find my home. We can talk then, without your little friends." I didn't want to leave them alone out here, but I don't think I had a choice. I grabbed what I could and scrawled a note on some white MRE wrapper with a grease pencil, balling it up and putting it inside Gabe's food for him to find when he awoke. I picked up a few things, an MRE and all of my ammo for my rifle. I thought about taking the RPG, but I figured against it, considering the wildlife in the area. I started down the trail, and not 10 minutes later, I started to see the light. Now that things have come full circle, I think I should take a break. Interrupting a story at the most critical moment is absolutely forbidden as a storytelling device, but I don't really have a choice. I've already been up way too late. I have to go on assignment tomorrow, but I guess I can sleep on the way there. Let me know what you think, and I'll try to post more when I get back in a few days. If it's a few days. Well, weird and wonderful story, that one. Not quite sure what to make of it. It does seem like it's set up for a part 2, doesn't it? Well, we shall have to wait and see if the author delivers or not. I certainly hope so, because some unanswered questions left there. Well, your thoughts and feelings on that one in the comment section below the video, and as ever, I'll do my best to join in the chat. Well, my dear friends, that's it for Monday, but of course I will be back again very, very soon, and I do so hope you're going to join me. You are, aren't you? Go on, say you will. Yes, yes, yes. Well, until then, sweet dreams and bye-bye. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time listening to me. Now, if you enjoyed the Dr. Creepen experience, then come find me on Facebook. Come chat with me on Twitter. Listen to the background music and download it if you like on SoundCloud. Drop by the store, pick up a t-shirt. And, importantly, if you've got a story you'd like me to read, send it to Dr. Creepen's Vault, the subreddit I set up so that I could read your stories. Now, looking forward to seeing you all again real soon. So, come check me out, okay?